Critical Role Recap Season 2, Episode 44. Last week's episode ended with the Mighty Nein having narrowly escaped Darktow with their lives and dispatching Ivanica through the Plank King's ruling. So they managed to get away with Ivanica's notebook and her information regarding Uk'otoa and his separate gems and altars and whatever that she knew. And they made their way on Ivanica's ship, the Squallbringer, I believe it's called, with only one functioning sail, and managed to find the location of the shipwreck that Ford had been on in his backstory originally, where he first found his power. And they dove into the water with water breathing from Ford and some cannonballs to speed their way down to the bottom. And they looked around for a bit and finally did stumble upon the shipwreck itself. That's where last episode ended and this episode picked up. So basically they check out the shipwreck and they get into combat with some of the fish people things that they had fought previously in the swamp when they had gone down underwater in that area. They fought 3 of them in this combat and dealt with them pretty handily. And then they continued to search the ship. Inside, they didn't really find anything. It looked like the entire ship had already been ransacked, most likely by these fish people who we know do seem to like hoarding gems and gold and shiny things for no real apparent reason. Jester used detect object and got a ping from a similar object to the cloven gem that Ford had somewhere in the distance, about 700, 800 feet off from where they were. So they did one last search of the cabin, of the captain's cabin on this ship, and went ahead and took off in search of this object. On their way there, they noticed some kind of odd things. There was a light emanating off in the distance, and they were thinking of maybe some sort of like angler fish that uses a light to attract prey. And they did eventually stumble upon a cave with a light over the entrance. And so when they first got in, Ford was definitely thinking that they might have just stepped into the mouth of a creature, but it seemed like it was just a cave for the most part. As they walked farther into it, they found big clumps of seaweed. And the seaweed, inside of the seaweed were dead bodies, bones, as well as scraps of clothing and stuff. And basically like just signs that a bunch of creatures had died here previously. So they did their best to try and avoid the seaweed, thinking that maybe there was some sort of creature hiding inside of there, and they crept along on the edges. However, Caleb was caught because he was the last straggling person in the line. He was grabbed up by the seaweed itself, and it did some poison damage to him. So it seems the seaweed itself is actually some sort of entity that attacks people and eats them with its poison. It didn't do very much damage, and they did manage to cut him free pretty easily. While they're making their way deeper into this cavern, they also occasionally, a member of the group feels some sort of cold touch in the back of their head, some sort of odd sensation. Caduceus sees out of the corner of his eye every now and then some movement, some sort of ghostly apparitions moving around, basically creepy crawly, spooky, underwater haunted house kind of idea is what they're going through. Bo does actually get possessed, but only for a brief second because Caduceus immediately uses turn evil when he sees it happening. So she just kind of goes unconscious for a second, but then comes right back up. And so they do continue to make their way quickly and try and avoid, now they're seeing these ghosts all around them, about a dozen or so of them that they're avoiding and continuing to go deeper into this cavern. They finally reach the end of the cavern, the path that they decided to go down at least. They find some arcane runes on the floor that Caleb investigates and starts to study and realizes it's some sort of summoning ritual in a way, some sort of invoking kind of thing of the elements. It's some sort of elemental spell that it would do, and it's old magic, ancient, powerful magic. And it seems as though there has been blood sacrifices made to these runes. As they're checking out this room, a creature attacks them. She was like half fish, half human kind of thing with big, gaping, evil teeth mouth and huge glowing yellow eyes. And she was snaking in and out of the seaweed that was growing all along the walls of the entire cavern. So she would hide and sneak through them. And she was the one that was brushing them with the cold feeling that they were getting. And she was actually marking them and sorceling them in order to later, during the combat, force them to think that she was somewhere that she wasn't. And so she forced Ford to a few times try and attack his allies by using his ensorcelled mind and convincing him that she was standing there, but in fact it was his ally standing there. Luckily, none of his attacks on his own allies ever really went through, due to bad rolls for the most part, and also disadvantage because of patient defense and stuff like that. So he actually never did any damage to his opponents, and that aspect of the fight ended up not mattering too much. However, when the fight very first started out, she decided to attack Caleb and used, like, I don't know, death gaze or something, and he failed his saving throw and instantly dropped to 0 health points and died immediately. Luckily, he has 2 clerics nearby, as well as Yasha, who can cast a heal every now and then too. So he gets brought back up immediately, and the rest of the fight goes pretty smoothly, to a degree. No one else drops down. Other people take quite a bit of damage, and it's definitely a fight that is hard for them to take on because of the fact that she's in her lair and she gets lair actions and legendary actions, and like it's a pretty good boss fight. But none of them are really in that much danger other than Caleb dropping down throughout most of the fight. However, by the end of the fight, she is very, very low, and Ford narrowly misses killing her by doing just not enough damage, just barely shy of the amount of damage he needed to finish her off. And she does end up taking off and kind of hiding. A few members give chase, but they never manage to find her, so she does survive. Ford goes ahead and searches this throne that's nearby and finds his second cloven gem and puts it inside of himself, and it joins his other eye on his sword, so now he has one in the hilt as well as one in the pommel. He doesn't think that this altar, that these runes are related to Uk'otoa in any way, but he is curious how they work, and as is Caleb. And Caleb is also kind of saying basically like, I'll do whatever you want me to do because I'm going to need favors from you later. So like, I'm willing to go down this path with you as long as basically you're going to go down my path with me later in the future. And so they agree and have an understanding, and then they start cutting themselves and putting blood on this altar, on this arcane runes, and it begins powering them. The blood immediately is sucked into them, and they do quite a bit of damage to themselves in order to try and fill up this altar, and it gets about 2/3, 3/4 of the way full when Ford is basically like, okay, never mind, we're good. Like, I think we understand. They have a little bloody palm-to-palm handshake, and kind of just take off and head back out on their way. And they use water walking to zip straight back up to the surface and get on their ship and start heading out on their way. As they make their way, after an hour or two, I suppose, a giant storm begins to broil directly above where they had been, where the shipwreck was and where the cave was. And they gather that that is what the altar would summon, is a giant devastating storm, is what that magic was intended to do. And so if they had continued to bleed themselves out for this altar, they very likely could have sunk their own ship. But yeah, that was basically the end of the episode. They decide to go ahead and make their way towards the location that they had determined previously that they would go to, that would be the best place for them to go fix their ship. And they get underway in that direction, and that's where this episode ends up. So next week, we'll pick up with them doing some more sailing and fixing their ship, and then deciding where to go from there. Ford still kind of wants to find the altar, but he might just say, hey, I've got the 2 stones, let's just kind of move on to someone else's. Like, what do you guys want to do? But yeah, we'll see from there. So that's about it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.